how many of you all have heard of deepfakes prior to this film? Good, good. Because it's good if awareness is increasing, but I'll kind of give a sense of why awareness alone is not enough. So again, this as much as I wanted to focus on the very specific issues that the film raises, I also want to give a broader view of the sort of issues that deepfakes present for us. And I do typically have a run at panel discussions with these sort of issues, in part because I know that my view as a singular person is very much limited, and so I try to include as many people in my conversations as possible. But for this, I really wanted to have a community discussion, because deepfakes are something that I think will impact local communities, smaller communities, a bit differently than they will from a national standpoint. And so I want you, in a way, to be part of my panel, to be part of this discussion. So the title of this this talk, this discussion is "Fake Images but Real Harms," and I'll speak a little bit about why it's not enough to speak of the impacts of deepfakes merely in terms of harm. It's not just about the harms, because they will certainly have those, as we saw in the film, but it goes a little bit more than that. I'll get into that. Yeah, so my plan first is to inform you about the technology, scare you a little bit more than maybe you've already been scared by the film, provide a little bit of hope, talk about the potential solutions that have been proposed to counteract the issues that deepfakes pose for us. And then I'll take that hope away a little bit by talking about the limitations that those solutions might have. And then I'll discuss what I think is a stronger, more worthwhile path to solving these issues. So deepfakes are sort of a combination of deep learning technology in order to produce fake content. So it can come in various forms, but the idea is that their intention is to deceive you as much as possible. To get to a point where that whatever it produces, whatever these programs produce, their task is to fool you in some way. And so one way of thinking about it is, so the way that the technology is going to work is there's a generative aspect of it that generates the images. And then there's this adversarial component, which is there to test what the generator produces. And so once it gets to a point where the sort of deception or I'm going to call it a bouncer, approves of what the generator produces, that's when this image is actually produced. That it gets into so one way I like to think about it is when you're a sort of teenager as the generator, they're trying to give a fake ID to this bouncer. The better the ID, the less able that maybe the bouncer is able to say that they're not allowed into the club. And so as a teenager goes back and forth between this bouncer, producing new IDs every time, their hope is that they improves with every iteration. And that's sort of how deepfakes are produced. So whatever is produced at the end is something that was able to deceive this bouncer. So by the time you and I see it, you're getting something that's high quality, that's going to be something that is close to, as close as possible to the original that is trying to sort of deceive you with. So in some cases, a lot of cases, you have Tom Cruise, who has been deepfaked quite a bit. And so there's this individual who produces images of himself, but with Tom Cruise's face. And so the idea is that whenever he produces a video or image, you think it's actually Tom Cruise. one thing you might say is that, well, deepfakes can only be produced by people who are highly tech savvy, who have been trained in these sort of technologies. Not quite. Right? Nothing against moms and cheerleaders. Nothing against moms and cheerleaders. This is just an example of just about anyone can produce a deepfake. They might be lower in quality, but they can still be produced by anyone, by your neighbors, anyone that you know here. Can go online, find a browser-based program, and produce a deepfake. The film talked about how 150 images are needed. We're still talking about deepfakes in their infancy. As we know, technologies improve over time, get better, and you can use less information to get what you want. And so they're already being used, they're already being misused, and even the lower quality ones are producing negative effects. In this case, it's cyberbullying. And so in the case of cyberbullying, it doesn't actually have to be the case that the person in the video is doing what they're being portrayed to be doing. All that matters is that people can use it to make fun of them, to put them in lower status in some way. So maybe we have carefully tailored legislation. So I think at the time that the film was being produced, legislation had not quite been there yet. There wasn't, our legislators, our state legislatures and federal legislatures were still catching up. We're still learning about the technology. And as we may or may not know, it's usually good if our legislation or if our policies are tailored carefully enough to where it doesn't prevent or prohibit the sort of activities that I just mentioned for free speech and educational purposes. As examples, our own state of Kansas has 3 pieces of policy currently. 2 of which have more to do with campaign issues, and the last one there is a broad sort of protection against deepfakes of the sort of activities that we saw in the film. One issue, or a few issues, with the policy route, going the policy route. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, we should definitely do these things. One issue is that came up in the film was that sometimes it can be difficult to find the perpetrator. Right? Policies are only helpful if you know who the perpetrator is. In a lot of cases, folks who do know more about the technology probably know how to stay anonymous, probably know how to stay invisible, essentially, in a digital setting. So in that sense, this would place a lot of work and resources for local police to chase down every perpetrator of these deepfakes. As we saw in the film, Taylor, who's the anonymous victim here, went through a lot of trouble to find the perpetrator on her own. And local police may not be up to the task, may not have the resources, the power, the time to chase down every sort of instance of the misuse of deepfakes. And again, there's plenty of technologies there that people can use to hide who they are, where they're from, and so it kind of makes us chasing a ghost in that instance. So that's one issue. The other issue that I've come to find is with the wording of the policies themselves. In a lot of cases, and I think especially with Kansas' particular policy, it protects those who have who have suffered some financial harm for given the protection of the deepfake. And so the only time you can really bring a case in is if you suffered financially. If you lost a job, if you did not get a job that you were going for, because we do know that many employers do look you up online to try to find out who you are and see if you're a good fit, for all sorts of reasons. And so if they find this, you can use that job. And then maybe then you can have a route to bring a case against that person. But then again, at the same time, you have to find them. And so those are the issues of policy. Now, they're not so strong that I would say, obviously we should still take these routes, but those are the limitations. And then you say, well, maybe all the platforms, the social media platforms, employ some sort of deepfake detection software. Or a program that will at least tell the users of their platforms what's deepfake and what is actually a real piece of information, or what's a real video, what's a real image, or a real voice versus the fake one. And let's go to the next slide. And here's just a list of the amount of business is booming for deepfake detections. And as we, again, learned in the film, the amount of deepfakes is increasing exponentially with every month, with every 6 months, with every year. I believe just last year alone, the number had grown to 500,000 deepfakes online. And those are just those that we've been able to come across. And so, arguably, even if these detection tools are 95% accurate or 95% effective, if a platform is getting about 500,000, a million deepfakes every day or within a few months, you can think about the amount of videos and voices and images that are still getting through. And they're also susceptible, as we've come to learn, that they can have false positives. So real or actual truthful information can be held back because there was a false positive by one of these detectors. So that's an issue there. And as I was mentioning with the liar's dividend, this is what I think is the big issue. This is an NPR story about Elon Musk's, the case that I was speaking to you about. People are trying to claim real videos are deepfakes. And as might be understood or understandable, the courts are not amused by that. And so, again, as I was saying here, the liar's dividend points out this issue that people can still benefit even if you're able to identify something as a deepfake. Because then they can start, or even if you start to learn about deepfakes, they can use that knowledge against you. They can use it by saying, oh, you see that, or do you see that video where it shows me doing this sort of illegal activity? It's a fake. And in an everyday conversation, that might work. Right? So, the liar's dividend is a bit more insidious than the sort of harms that we've come across already. And so to really bring that out, when we talk about information, we talk about the flow of information. And I like that analogy, I like the way that wording is, because again, it gets us thinking about the sort of environment in which environment flows. At some point, there's a point in time where many of us share the same sort of flow of information. We got our facts from the same places, we got our knowledge from established and trustful sources, and we were able to have, fruitful, maybe at some point, maybe definitely not recently, but at some point we were able to have fruitful, considerate conversations about very important topics. So we trusted science, we trusted certain institutions, about news institutions, universities, schools, and then we trusted each other, right? We trusted each other to give us some useful information. That's changed, right? And so diminishing trust has been an ongoing issue within our communities. So as of right now, the trust in media, mass media, is probably at its lowest point. And so, again, if you've been keeping track of the rhetoric around universities, scientific institutions, trust there too is also diminishing. And to the point where I think what is happening, if it probably already is happening, what I've called is solipsistic trust, which is just another way of saying, I'm going to believe whatever I want to believe. I'm going to believe what already sort of coheres with what I believe, or want to believe. And so we start choosing and curating our own rivers of information. We start choosing the sources we trust, we start choosing the people we trust, to the point where we're isolated in terms of the information that we isolate our flow of information to where it's closer to who we are, who we identify as, what our preferences are as people. And so that, to me, will be only exacerbated, only sort of further enhanced by the use of deepfakes and the proliferation of deepfakes. Because then we start saying that we can't trust anything that's online. We can't trust anything. And if most people get their news from online media, which a lot of people are starting to, we can't really trust their testimony. When you're having a conversation with somebody, you kind of mistrust them because of where they're getting their information from. Okay. So any solution, and I don't have it fully fleshed out for you today, and that's okay, because in part, it's a community problem, it's a social problem, it's something that not some singular professor is going to be able to solve on their own, but it's something that communities are going to have to contribute to, a conversation that communities are going to have to be part of. So it's definitely the law and policy route. We definitely need the technology solutions, but those two alone are not enough. We need a more socially based solution that takes into account seriously what the principles are, the norms are, in terms of the ways that we gather information, the ways that we determine who to trust. Trust is a very sort of a central issue in sort of counteracting the misuse and the issues that deepfakes will have on us socially. So ultimately, it's something that all of us, professors, lawyers, everyone it's a conversation that everyone has to be a part of, not just those that have some sort of position in these particular areas. Okay. Why is that? Why do I think that? Partly it's a naive idea that's sort of embodied in this quote. That for fans of the West Wing, you'll recognize this movie. So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful individuals can change the world, and the part after that is because that's the only thing that ever has. So we need to, my view, or my sort of hope, is that any solution that we come by, it's not going to be one that's going to be solved by our legislatures, it's not going to be one that's solved by our technicians, by our engineers, it's going to be solved amongst ourselves. It's going to be solved within communities. And part of why I started Orange Talks is because I thought that the first place to sort of counteract misinformation and poor conversations that we often see on cable news is to start with local communities. And I think the same issue, the same thing permeates, and it's also the case with how to solve the issues that I think deepfakes will cause socially. That's my view. That's my hope. And I hope that you will be part of this conversation, not just tonight, but ongoing. So thank you all for listening. Sticking through. My personal view is yes, it is. I think anyone that posts pictures of their babies and of themselves is kind of running the risk of your likeness being used or being misused. I'd say, so in addition, I think what the film doesn't point out is that in addition to women being used for pornography, unfortunately, so are children. And so that's probably another sort of topic that's being followed. But yeah, so the likeness of children is also being used within these activities. So that's another concern. Yeah.
In your vision of self-assisting, you seem to be mainly focusing on the isolation problem of each person creating their own news feed.
Yeah.
But you were also mentioning that each person deciding on what sources they would trust might be a kind of problem of its own. Isn't that exactly what we want people to do? To think carefully about what sources they will trust and curate their own sources of media?
Yes and no, because yes, in the terms of I think people should be more discerning about where they get their information from. They should think carefully about which sources they trust. But at the same time, we don't want the flows of information to be so isolated that we can't come to agree on things that are just matters of fact. And I think when we can't even agree on that, that's when the isolation is a problem. So in some ways, the isolated flows need to converge on a few important topics. But at the same time, we also don't want, because there's issues of saying, oh, this one place is the only place where we should be getting the information from. I think there's an inherent concern about doing something like that. So there should be as many sources of information as possible that we have to choose from, but we should also agree on what's sort of the crucial facts that a lot of these issues turn on. So isolated flows of information might be okay, but we need them to converge on at some point, at certain points.
That points towards more need for common authoritative sources. Is there? Do you have any suggestions for what hope there is for authoritative sources to make some kind of return?
I would say the ones that sort of engage in the least amount of conjecture, the least amount of opinion, or of the writer's opinion. But the ones that are, the first thing that we kind of need to really look at is the accuracy of a piece of news. Then we can kind of talk about whether a person's opinion on that piece of news is right or things like that. But accuracy is the first thing. And yes, there are some places that are better at being accurate. Local news affiliates are probably where I would start. Because at least you're getting some a bit more accurate because it's closer to the issue, it's closer to the situation. Other than that, I think our news outlets have a lot of work to do to prove that they are accurate, that they're not just sort of trying to be their own sort of leaders in thought. I think that's the big. So the big thing is not necessarily on the consumers, but it's also on the producers. That's. Any other questions? Any other concerns that people have?
Can you talk a little bit about like intergenerational understanding of this in the sense of like how all the barriers to being able to talk across generations? Like I'm thinking back to when, sorry if you have to repeat all this, but I'm thinking back to when like Congress didn't understand how cell phones work, but they were trying to regulate them. And then just imagining how different levels of understanding are going to feed into this. Like the people who are presenting in that film were not my generation; they're younger than And so just thinking about who's facing this at what level, and how do we communicate across generations of understanding about it.
Yeah. So Anna, who's my wife, spoke earlier about a call that my mother received where the person on the other line was trying to say that they were one of my nephews. And she was pretty close to believing it. She was engaging with this individual. She was engaging with this in the conversation and came quite close to giving this person money because they were asking for money. In another way, so in the film, Adam, I think the representative of an organization that tracks this, said that he trained 500 judges on deepfakes. And the issue that I think that's important work. I think that's needed. One concern is it's not just knowing about the technology or knowing how it works is a concern. But so there are pieces of legislation that use the term reasonable expectation of privacy. So if a judge doesn't quite know the whole situation, or doesn't not just know about deepfakes, but doesn't know about social media or the internet, it's hard for them to evaluate whether a person in Taylor's case had a reasonable expectation of privacy. Right, because if you're online, if you're on social media, and you're constantly posting pictures of yourselves, it's kind of difficult. It puts a judge in a difficult position to say, yeah, you had a reasonable expectation of privacy, or that maybe you did it because you knew that your account was public. You knew, or even if it wasn't public, it's private. People within your circle are still able to obviously produce deepfakes. So, what does it mean to have a reasonable expectation of privacy? So, if you don't have a sense of the technology, if you don't know how social media works or what the norms are involved, then yeah, it's kind of difficult for a judge who's older to say that, to evaluate or to assess whether someone had a reasonable expectation of privacy. So I think that's where the generational issues come about. It becomes hard for people to evaluate surrounding issues of privacy, of reasonable expectation, because you might see that a parent might blame Taylor for, well, you posted all these pictures. And that's only because maybe they don't quite understand the situation. But yeah, that's right. Any other concerns? Questions? Okay. Well, I mean, I think we're already past 7. And I thank you all for sticking with me, for sticking with the technological issues. If you're curious about the progress I make, or the progress that people I work with make, because again, I work at a research institute at KU where people are designing ways for us to detect AI, whether it's ChatGPT material or deepfakes. So if you want to keep track of that progress, if you want to keep track of what's going on in just Kansas alone, I2S, Institute for Information Sciences, we have a few social media accounts if you want to follow us. And you can also follow me on any platform. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. And I hope you continue it with each other after this. So thank you very much.